I found out that my fiancé had shared a hotel room with his coworker, and when I checked his phone, I was devastated to discover they had been having an affair for months. I used to believe that Eric was my forever. We had been together since we were 16, growing up side by side, navigating life's twists and turns together. Our relationship was built on trust, or at least I thought so. When he proposed 6 months ago, I said yes without hesitation. I thought we had something unbreakable, something real. That illusion shattered on a random Tuesday evening. The day started like any other. I went to work, answered emails, had coffee with my coworkers, and counted down the hours until Eric's return. I even planned a nice dinner for us, excited to hear about his trip. But as the hours passed, an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. I kept brushing it off. This was just my insecurity talking, right? But something felt off. Eric had been on a 2-day work trip with his coworker, Samantha. I had met her once at a company event, and let's just say my first impression wasn't great. She was confident, bubbly, flirtatious, everything I wasn't. She was the kind of woman who could make a whole room revolve around her without even trying. And the worst part? She knew it. But she was married, so I convinced myself there was nothing to worry about. When he landed, I decided to surprise him at the airport. I had imagined the scene in my head. He'd see me, his face would light up, and he'd pull me into a tight hug, happy to be home. Instead, when he walked out of the terminal with Samantha beside him, my presence barely registered. Samantha, on the other hand, seemed annoyed, as if I was intruding. She clung to his arm a little too long before letting go, her smile just a little too smug. "Oh, Lena, I didn't know you were picking him up," she said, her voice dripping with fake surprise. "We had such an amazing time. Your fiancé is quite the travel buddy." Eric barely met my eyes as he muttered, "Hey babe." I tried to shake the feeling of unease, but then Samantha threw in the bombshell. "Oh, and girl, you're so lucky. Eric gives the best massages." My shoulders were killing me after that first day, and he totally worked out the knots. Such a lifesaver. My stomach twisted. What kind of coworker gives massages on a business trip? I laughed nervously, trying to mask the dread creeping up my spine. "Oh, I didn't know Eric was into massages." Samantha smirked. "Oh, he's got magic hands." Eric shot her a look, but the damage was already done. A cold weight settled in my chest. And for the first time in our relationship, I felt like I didn't know the man standing beside me. The ride home was quiet. Eric seemed distant, scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging me. I should have confronted him right then, but fear held me back. I was afraid of what I'd find if I pushed too hard, so I convinced myself I was overreacting. But the doubts wouldn't go away. When we got home, Eric went straight to bed, exhausted from his long trip. That was my first red flag. Not a word about the conference. No enthusiasm about seeing me. Just a mumbled good night as he collapsed onto the mattress. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at him, my heart hammering in my chest. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. And then, against my better judgment, I snooped. I opened his suitcase first, nothing suspicious. But when I checked the side pocket of his travel bag, my fingers brushed against something folded. I pulled it out and unfolded the thin slip of paper. I found the hotel receipt tucked inside his bag. 1 room, 1 bed. My hands trembled as I stared at the proof, but I still clung to some ridiculous hope that there was a logical explanation. Maybe there was a mix-up at the hotel? Maybe he slept on the couch? Maybe I was being paranoid, letting my insecurities get the best of me. I tried to steady my breathing, but my mind was racing. I could hear Eric's steady breathing from the bedroom, completely oblivious to the storm building inside me. My stomach twisted as I folded the receipt, my fingers gripping it so tightly that the paper crumpled. This couldn't be real. I paced the room, debating my next move. Every fiber of my being told me to confront him, to shake him awake and demand an answer. But something darker urged me to dig deeper, to find undeniable proof, to make sure I wasn't about to be gaslit into believing I was crazy. And so, I did something I had sworn I would never do. I unlocked his phone using his fingerprint while he was asleep. The screen lit up, casting a glow over his sleeping face. My heart pounded against my ribs as I navigated to his messages. I hesitated for a second, but the image of that hotel receipt burned in my mind. With a deep breath, I opened the conversation with Samantha. My world tilted. The messages were endless. Scrolling through them felt like wading through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Inside jokes, flirty remarks, late-night confessions, and the worst part, mockery at my expense. My vision blurred as I read message after message of them laughing at me, at my trust, at my cluelessness. I don't know how she still hasn't figured it out yet. Faced with tears of joy, maybe she just doesn't want to know. Makes it easier. God, you should have seen the way she clung to me before I left. So desperate. Kinda sad, honestly. Tears stung my eyes, but I forced myself to keep reading. I needed to know everything. I needed to see just how deep this betrayal ran. And then I saw it. A message dated 2 days after he proposed to me. Can't believe I'm engaged, LOL. Still thinking about last night. Samantha's reply was just as nonchalant. Told you you'd love it. Guess I should start shopping for a wedding dress now? I felt like I was going to be sick. I dropped the phone onto the bed as bile rose in my throat. My hands clenched into fists, shaking with a mixture of rage and devastation. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to break everything in sight. How could he do this to me? How could he look me in the eyes, put a ring on my finger, and promise me forever, while he was already betraying me? That was when something inside me snapped. I wanted to wake him up and scream, to shake him until he felt the same pain tearing through my chest. But rage that loud wasn't what I needed. No, I needed something colder, something final. I needed him gone. I moved through the bedroom like a storm, yanking open drawers, grabbing handfuls of his clothes, and shoving them into trash bags. Every piece of fabric felt like another lie, another moment I had wasted loving a man who had never truly been mine. The sound of plastic crinkling as I tied the bags shut was oddly satisfying, like sealing away the last remnants of the life I had thought was real. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness. From fury. I grabbed my phone and called Victoria. She answered on the first ring. What happened? Her voice was sharp, alert, like she had been expecting this call. I need you here, I said, barely recognizing my own voice. It was flat, hollow. She didn't ask questions. On my way. Minutes later, Victoria stormed through the door, her eyes scanning the mess I had made. Her jaw tightened when she saw the trash bags lined up by the door. Are you sure about this? She asked, glancing at Eric's unconscious figure, still sprawled across the bed, blissfully unaware of the chaos he was about to wake up to. I nodded, my grip tightening on his phone. He needs to leave. Victoria didn't argue. She didn't tell me to calm down or ask if I wanted to talk. That's why she was my best friend. She understood. Instead, she bent down, grabbed one of the bags, and hauled it toward the door without a word. Then came the moment I had been dreading. I approached the bed, staring at the man who had once been my whole world. How many nights had I watched him sleep, feeling lucky to have him. Now he just looked like a stranger. I reached down and shook him roughly. Wake up, Eric groaned, rolling over. Babe. What? His voice was thick with sleep, but the moment his eyes opened and registered the scene before him, the packed bags, Victoria standing by the door with her arms crossed, the cold fury on my face, confusion turned into pure panic. What's going on? His voice was hoarse as he sat up, rubbing his eyes like he could blink this nightmare away. I held up his phone, my fingers wrapped so tightly around it that my knuckles turned white. You tell me. His face drained of color. I watched as his mind scrambled for an escape route, as if there was any excuse that could save him now. Lena, he started, voice breaking. I can explain. I let out a bitter laugh. Explain? You want to explain how you've been screwing Samantha for months? How you proposed to me while sleeping with someone else? My voice was steady, but my hands were trembling. Or maybe you want to explain the texts where you laughed at me behind my back? Eric's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It wasn't like that, he stammered. I never meant to hurt you. I shook my head. You didn't just hurt me, Eric. You humiliated me. He lunged toward me, reaching for my hands, but I stepped back like his touch would burn me. Please, he begged, his voice cracking. It was a mistake, Lena. A stupid, meaningless mistake. I exhaled sharply, my grip on his phone tightening before I finally threw it onto the bed in disgust. A mistake, I spat. Cheating once is a mistake. Lying to me for months? That's a choice. Eric ran a hand through his hair, his breathing ragged. I was confused, he whispered. Things between us were moving so fast. I panicked. I scoffed. So your way of dealing with panic was to crawl into bed with someone else? Silence. Victoria stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. You need to leave. Eric turned to her, desperate. Victoria, please, you have to understand. She doesn't have to understand anything. I interrupted, my voice cold. Pack up whatever you need and go. I don't care where you go. Just get out. His shoulders slumped as the weight of reality finally sank in. He looked at me, eyes pleading. Lena, I swallowed the lump in my throat. I loved you, I said quietly, but I will never be someone's second choice. Eric didn't move for a long time, but eventually he nodded. Maybe he finally realized there was no talking his way out of this. Maybe he was just too exhausted to fight. Either way, he grabbed a duffel bag and began stuffing it with clothes, his hands moving slowly, like dragging out the inevitable would somehow make it easier. I turned away, refusing to watch. I had already seen enough. When the door finally clicked shut behind him, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I blocked him on everything. I should have felt devastated. Instead, for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Breakups are messy, but infidelity, that's nuclear. The first few days were a blur of anger, heartbreak, and exhaustion. I felt like I was trapped in some cruel joke, replaying every memory of our relationship over and over again, trying to decipher if any of it had ever been real. Had he loved me even for a second? Or had I just been a placeholder while he entertained himself with someone else? I barely ate. I barely slept. My mind spiraled, grasping for answers I'd never get. The betrayal wasn't just about the cheating. It was about how easily he had lied to my face, how effortlessly he had built a life with me while building another one behind my back. It was the ultimate humiliation. But Victoria? She wasn't about to let me drown in self-pity. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding 2 iced coffees and a bag of pastries. Get up, she demanded, yanking the blankets off me. We're going out. I groaned. I don't want to. I don't care. She threw some clothes at me. You're not going to sit here and let that cheating piece of garbage ruin your life. And just like that, I was dragged out of my personal misery and into the world. Brunches turned into happy hours. Happy hours turned into long nights filled with loud music, new faces, and distractions. She made it her mission to remind me that there was life beyond Eric. And then there was Logan. Logan had always been in the background of my life. One of Eric's closest friends, always polite, always friendly. We had never been particularly close, but now things felt different. It was a Friday night. A group of us had gone out, and the drinks flowed a little too easily. The music was loud, the bar was packed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt light. No sadness, no overthinking, just the warmth of alcohol in my veins and the weight of Victoria's laughter beside me. Somewhere between my second and third cocktail, Logan leaned in closer. You okay? He asked, his breath warm against my ear. I nodded. I think so. He studied me for a moment, something unreadable in his gaze. He never deserved you, he finally said, his voice rough with frustration. I should have brushed it off. I should have ignored the way my heart clenched at his words, the way his presence suddenly felt heavier. But I didn't. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the need to feel wanted. Maybe it was something darker, the burning desire for revenge. I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. One drink led to another. One touch turned into a lingering glance. And before I knew it, we were tangled together in the back of a cab, his lips on mine, his hands gripping my waist like I was something precious, something worth holding on to. By the time we made it to his place, I knew exactly what I was doing. I told myself it was just a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But the truth? The truth was that I wanted Eric to know. I wanted him to hurt the way I did. I wanted him to picture me with his best friend. And when he finally found out, oh, he did. News spread like wildfire. Eric found out about me and Logan, and suddenly the man who had shattered my trust was calling me the villain. The hypocrisy was almost comical. The same man who had lied to my face, who had spent months sneaking around with another woman, now had the audacity to be outraged. I woke up to a series of missed calls and texts, each more desperate than the last. You seriously slept with Logan? What the hell, Lena? He was my best friend. I can't believe you'd do this to me. I stared at my phone, debating how to respond. And then, A slow smirk spread across my face as I typed out my reply. And you were supposed to be my husband. Delivered. Read. Silence. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was the one holding the power. Eric didn't get to rewrite this narrative. He didn't get to paint himself as the victim while I suffered in silence. No, this time I was the one calling the shots. The backlash was swift. His friends, our mutual friends, began picking sides. Some sent me passive-aggressive messages, telling me how messed up it was to sleep with his best friend. Others, the ones who actually had a moral compass, reminded him that he had no right to play the victim. He cheated first. He destroyed the relationship. He made his bed, and now he had to lie in it, alone. Victoria, as expected, was my biggest supporter. He's only mad because you hit him where it hurts, she said, sipping her latte as we sat in a cafe, watching the chaos unfold through social media. You did what he never expected. You stopped crying over him, and she was right. Logan and I, we didn't last. I never expected us to. It wasn't about love or some great romance. It was about reclaiming myself. It was about reminding Eric that he didn't get to break me without consequences. And oh, did he feel the consequences. He tried reaching out again. More texts. More excuses. I made a mistake, Lena. But what you did, that was deliberate. You didn't even try to work things out. You threw away everything we had. Each message was a weak attempt to shift blame, to make me feel guilty, to drag me back into his orbit. I never responded, because the truth was, I had already moved on. 6 months later, I was thriving, not just surviving, thriving. I had thrown myself into my career, poured my energy into my friendships, and, most importantly, into myself. I stopped measuring my worth by the love of a man who never truly valued me. Instead, I built a life that was entirely mine, free from the shadows of my past. Victoria and I booked a trip to Europe, a spontaneous, last-minute decision that felt like the kind of recklessness I had been too afraid to embrace before. We spent weeks getting lost in cobblestone streets, drinking wine by the Seine, and laughing until our stomachs hurt. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about Eric. I wasn't thinking about the betrayal, the pain, or the heartbreak. I was thinking about me. I started hitting the gym. Not for revenge, not to make anyone jealous, but for myself. My body became stronger, my mind sharper. I dyed my hair, changed my wardrobe, experimented with styles I had once been too scared to try. With every transformation, I felt more like the person I had been suppressing for years, the version of me that had been waiting to break free. And Eric? Last I heard, Samantha dumped him. Turns out, she wasn't interested in being with a man who cheats on his fiancé. The irony was almost too perfect. One day, I ran into him at a coffee shop. I had been laughing at something Victoria said, the sound of it easy and unburdened, when I felt the weight of someone watching me. I turned and there he was, Eric. He looked smaller, not physically, but as if life had drained the spark out of him. The confidence, the arrogance, the smugness, it was gone. In its place stood a man who seemed hollow, a shadow of the person I had once loved. His mouth opened, as if he wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an attempt to rewrite history, to convince me that he had always loved me, that he had made a mistake, that he regretted it all. But I didn't care. I turned away, grabbed my coffee, and walked out without a second glance, because I didn't need closure. I had already given it to myself. People say the best revenge is moving on, but I think it's more than that. It's moving on happily, unapologetically, without a second glance. Eric was my past, but I am my own future. What do you think? Have you ever been in a situation like this? How would you have handled it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories that will keep you hooked.